Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Webley New Model Royal Irish Constabulary Revolver. And today we're going to attempt to unpack its history, but first, you know what. With an overall length of 9.3 inches and weighing in at 1.7 pounds, this triple action isn't exactly a pocket revolver, but it still doesn't compare to most of the military revolvers we've seen so far, at least in scale. It does, however, have a 6-shot cylinder, gate loading and ejecting the 450 Adams cartridge. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that this program, much like PBS, is available to everyone thanks to donations from viewers like you. Although I'm fairly sure the producers at PBS aren't on the same watch list that I am. Last episode, we had a jolly jaunt through the gunsmithing capital that was the Birmingham gun trade. We met William Tranter, an industrial powerhouse who still managed to keep a somewhat lower historical profile. That's because William Tranter did not showboat. Instead, it seems he knew that he was a part of a historical hive, a network of independent smiths and suppliers. Tranter was all too happy to quietly contract for the manufacture of pistols, rifles, or whatever else he could, and when he marked his products at all, it was humbly and out of the way in order to let the retailer put their brand on it. Unfortunately, as we'll see later, this approach didn't lead him to a firearms dynasty, and the Birmingham revolver crown would be set on the head of an entirely different person. This story starts with Philip Webley. Born June 22nd of 1812 in Birmingham, Warwickshire, England, third son of Hannah and Thomas Webley, who was employed as a button turner. Literally making buttons, folks. Thomas Webley saw a better future for his sons in the gun trade, so much so that Philip's elder brother James actually preceded him into the industry. At age 14, Philip would apprentice to Benjamin Watson Jr., a gun lock filer, for 7 years. By 1835, he was known to be in business with his elder brother James under the banner of percussioners and gun lock makers on Wayman Street in Birmingham. 2 years later, Philip Webley would marry Caroline Davis, who was the daughter of another gun trade member, William Davis. Now, a manufacturer of bullet molds and gun implements since 1817, William Davis had actually passed away unexpectedly in 1831, leaving the business in the hands of his widow and daughter. Following his marriage, Philip left his brother's side and began working out of 84 Wayman Street, officially buying it out in 1845. Now, Philip may or may not be the star of our show, so I'll speed things up just a bit. Despite filing a few patents of his own, Philip never seems to have produced any significant batches of guns of his own design. Both Webley brothers were licensed producers of other inventors' popular guns, that is until 1853, when James introduced his long spur percussion revolver. Marketed as the improved patent repeating pistols, these were fairly successful and saw some private use in India and Crimea. Unfortunately, James would pass away unexpectedly in March of 1856. His patents and shop at St. Mary's Square would both pass down to his younger brother. The very next year, Samuel Colt would leave London. To keep this brief, American entrepreneur and famed gun designer Samuel Colt is often called the father of the revolver. His focus had also been one of machine-made firearms capable of complete parts interchangeability. We take this for granted today, but in the middle 1800s, the firearms industry, like every other really, was a hand-worked artisanal craft. Pistols tended to be produced in batches, sure, and within the batch, the guns looked pretty much identical, but you couldn't just take a hammer or trigger from one and drop it into another without some extra time and labor. However, that ability would mean massive logistical savings for, say, military forces out in the field, and this was no new desire. It was openly discussed even in the early 1800s and probably beforehand. And there were shops capable of truly interchangeable parts, but they required the use of jigs, which were invariably quickly consumed as hand production was carried out. Having to be rebuilt to exact specifications over and over made the process slow and very expensive, meaning the cost wasn't worth the benefit for these interchangeable guns. Colt might have espoused a doctrine of perfected mechanical repetition. It was always easier to just rely on skilled tradesmen in certain markets though. However, Samuel Colt's American market wasn't nearly as skilled, and he was determined that machinery could provide for exact replication of parts, and while he never quite achieved what we call truly interchangeable components in his lifetime, he got a lot closer and for a lot cheaper than anyone in that era. However, as it turns out, his revolvers weren't selling well enough overseas to justify his expensive factory in Britain. That is to say, machine manufacture had a very high initial cost and required massive orders of the exact same gun in order to make it worth it. Colt leaving London did achieve two things for Webley. First, the pressure of another, possibly more innovative competitor was immediately withdrawn. And second, it left a vacancy in what would surely be the future of arms production, long-term production of specific models using machine-made interchangeable parts. All that said, in 1857, this is what Webley was producing. Nicknamed the Wedge Frame, this was another handmade gun, licensed from another British gunsmith, Joseph Bentley. However, it did prove popular enough to help fill the family coffers. In 1859, Philip would be joined by his eldest son Thomas James Webley, who had just completed his apprenticeship. On this occasion, the business name would change to Philip Webley and Son. Despite the singular case, the name did not change when the next son, Henry Webley, joined up as well. Like Tranter, the Webleys adapted quickly to the rimfire revolution. They released a copy of the Smith & Wesson tip-up design and expanded from there. I won't be chasing down every model as there are a lot and most are unnamed, but I do want to point out just a few. By the 1860s, Webley was producing a compact triple-action rimfire revolver. I don't know of a model name, and its year of introduction is also hard to pin down. This particular pattern has been associated with both them and Tranter. Again, we're going to see a lot of overlap between these two names, and as I've said plenty of times over in the past two episodes, licensing back and forth in Birmingham was common, like in, say, Liège over in Belgium. However, there is a further connection between Webley and Tranter that goes a bit beyond just the business. For about 15 years of overlap, William Tranter lived at 13 St. Mary's Row, with James Webley at 14 St. Mary's Row. They were immediate neighbors. So I suspect they had ample opportunity to make deals on the many and varied batches of pistols that Webley was producing. Like say this one, the Webley Dual System Revolver. By swapping the cylinder, you could use 54-bore percussion ammo or 4.42 breech-loading rimfire. It's the earliest I know that Webley was using a licensed Tranter lockwork, the same lockwork from our last episode. From there, Webley was a producer of Tranter's monstrous 5.77 man-stopper revolvers, likely using forgings and other components straight from Tranter, as the guns were nearly identical between the firms. Again, this used the 1856 patented Tranter lockwork. Now, I'm trying to keep tight to the designs that I believe directly influence our gun today, so don't get confused. Webley wasn't just ripping off Tranter all the time, or licensing from Tranter all the time. They borrowed from whoever, whenever they felt it was warranted for good design. As a matter of fact, I'd say that this was their real talent. They would seek out the best combination of features and licensed as needed in order to make an overall good revolver. Their willingness to use anything meant that they had the best chance of striking gold. Like this guy, popularly known as the holster model, to my knowledge, Webley never gave it a clear name. Using a Marriott hammer-nosed triple-action system, these were not Tranter derivatives, but did follow in that compact 6-shot vein. The arbor is retained by a thumb screw, the ejector is screwed into the butt, and the spring on the side is a modification of the Francot hammer block, just like the much later Italian Bodeo de Lauzo safety. Note the raised cylinder stops requiring a cutout in the frame. While this particular larger bore model was never given a clear designation, later smaller frame pistols of the same construction, seemingly only in small bore cartridges, would be named the Webley No. 1. It was also about this time that Webley started branding its products with their winged bullet logo, marked W&S for Webley and Son. Through advertising, they started aggressively differentiating their brand, an excellent strategy compared to Tranter's quiet productivity. Again, Webley wasn't married to one design. Even with the compact large-bore revolver family underway, they were swinging wide and often, which means they had a better statistical chance of making that hit, which they apparently did in 1867. It looks a lot like the previous model, 6-shot, 4.42 centerfire, single and double action, same prominent cylinder stops, just without the hammer block, but look closer. The ejector is now housed inside the central arbor, and it rotates around the barrel. This was a feature borrowed from the Perrin revolver. Compact, secure, and ever ready to use. Also, you can probably just make out a little sear sticking out behind the trigger. Ah yes, we've returned to the Tranter lockwork. This is what we'll later come to know as the Webley RIC No. 1 first pattern. Recall, Webley had previously licensed the works of one Joseph Bentley, an elder gunsmith in the Birmingham trade who had specialized in saddle pistols and military handguns. It's believed, but due to my present knowledge currently unproven, that James Webley had apprenticed under Bentley. That's where the relationship came from. Regardless, Bentley was better connected for government sales, both military and particularly police. And so the Webley new design was shopped around various armies and constabularies through their friend. Fairly quickly, it managed to strike pay dirt. Half a world away in Toronto, where the local police were frankly just trying to keep a lid on the town. This is another one of those stories that is way too big to squeeze into a portion of one episode on a Revolver, but Toronto has a long history of literally rioting. And by 1855, it had gotten ridiculous. Precisely ridiculous because, I'm not kidding here, they had a circus riot after some drunk clowns, actual pie-in-the-face clowns mind you, got into a fist fight in a bordello. The clones won the fight that night, but they also apparently were fighting members of the firefighting company. The next day, the town itself attacked the circus with the hook and ladder wagon being used to pull the tent down, and the firemen then flipped the circus wagons over and set them on fire, because that's what firemen do. This isn't even the worst story, people. There were literally street brawls between firefighting companies while everything was on fire. Eventually, the Toronto police were bulked up and trained almost entirely on anti-riot measures. By the 1860s, things were improving, but then came the Fenian Raids, a series of armed incursions into Canada by the Fenian Brotherhood, an organization looking to force Britain into leaving Ireland. While most of these attacks were put down quickly, the Fenians were successful at the Battle of Ridgeway near Toronto. While they were eventually broken up, either dispersed or arrested, Ridgeway had been a black eye. Really, it just pushed the need to further martialize Toronto's police force, and a modern, rugged, and inexpensive martial revolver, that'd be just the ticket. To my knowledge, the Toronto police would be the first to take up the new Webley pistol chambering the .442 centerfire cartridge. The order was likely very small. Sadly, I don't have the total. However, that order likely led to another because the Toronto police, as with many government organizations there at the time, were closely tied to the Protestant Irish at home, where another police force concerned with civil unrest and effectively acting as a paramilitary organization was in need of pocket-sized firepower. The newly royal Irish Constabulary, IRC. Formed as the just plain Irish Constabulary, this force had been formally organized in 1822. While they did fight crime, they were also, like in Toronto, charged with anti-riot and unrest responsibilities. An 1836 act reorganized the Constabulary, and in 1837 a formal code of regulations was published. In 1867, the Constabulary successfully capped the Fenian Rising, a rebellion against British rule. In response to the Constabulary's success, Queen Victoria granted the force the royal prefix. Even better than a title change, in 1868, the now Royal Irish Constabulary selected Webley's 6-shot revolver for service, but at that point, it still wasn't technically our gun today. To be honest, I'm not sure whether the first contract for the RIC was fulfilled with the first pattern of the Webley Revolver or the second. Given known examples in serials, I lean towards the latter. Regardless, 1,000 would be ordered, which meant that Webley finally had a reason to lock onto a single design and produce it over and over again. Which is why I suspect the second version, by the way, was actually the one produced. Given the habits of the day, I doubt Webley had already made 1,000 plus of the first pattern in expectation of this particular purchase. And by the time they went to do so, A, it would be a huge pain to replicate exactly the original gun, and B, why not make some improvements while you can? So we see a lot more revolvers out there in this pattern, all the same features as before, except now the cylinder stops are scalloped in and set at the front of the cylinder. A tipping cylinder stop was added in front of the trigger. This was actually a return to the configuration used in the dual system revolver. Over time, more changes would come. The forward cylinder stop was dropped in favor of a stop attached to the trigger, lowering the parts count and simplifying manufacture. At the same time, the ejector would be changed. Instead of the pivoting point being around the barrel, it was affixed to the right side of the frame. This was likely licensed from the 1872 Adams patent. Mechanically, this is the final evolution of the Webley RIC in terms of cosmetics and dimensions. However, we're not done yet. The end of that ejector rod would be changed out for an acorn shape, actually much like what happened on the Tranter 1868 last episode. And following that, the cylinder would be elongated in order to take the .455 government cartridge. At the same time, it was fluted. This 1885 copy of the Army and Navy CSL lists both models, with the defining feature being the use of .455, although this would also include .476, and a few pieces have turned up in unusual chamberings like .44 Russian. Webley's ad tells us this fifth variation is their new model RIC, which was also backwards compatible, with .450 Adams offerings available, likely for police still using that cartridge. The listed price, £2 even, unless you wanted nickel plating. That costs more. I apparently did not opt for the extras because mine is just plain blued, but let's get a look at it anyway. Alright, we have sort of a medium-sized single and double action revolver with, what's this say right here? Webley's RIC #1 450 center fire. The designation #1 is a bit confusing, not only with Webley, but other Birmingham shops at the time. It appears to be primarily a way to differentiate this revolver from others available for sale from the same company at the same time in various catalogs. Webley had several #1s, and our pistol today is just the RIC #1. By example, here is an RIC #2, which more so than the #1 can vary significantly in form and features thanks to smaller batch manufacturing. Generally, the #2s display features like barrel sight ridges, raised rear sights, and more angular grips, but it's not always true. We will definitely not be exploring all these little changes and should get back to our bog standard new model #1. Fun feature of these guys is that the barrels are not actually round, they're sort of an oval shape with narrowness up top. Neat. Okay, so again, single. And then when we pull that trigger, that's gonna hit that, see it hitting that little sear down there? That's our release. Or in this case, double. Same Tranter-like system as last time, action revolver. And our ejector is vaguely similar as well because it is also an Adams type, twist, and pull though in this case, and boy, oh, good lord, she's stiff because she's gotten bent somewhere along the way, which is sort of the downside of the system versus, say, the Tranter with that spring, if you recall it. Twist and pull, rotate over, and then we would open our loading gate, which uses the two-position spring system, again, that we saw on the Tranter. So we'll push out, and of course we'll be able to load anything we like. Now this gun, interestingly, has enough clearance for the firing pin even with the hammer down, and it seems to be on purpose. Also, ideally you would have it manually rebounded for loading, but realistically you're probably not going to hurt yourself either way. This gun needs just a little bit of oomph to make sure that it makes contact, and then just enough spring back in the system not to drag. I wouldn't say that it's an intentional spring-loaded rebound, but it is enough not to have that same sort of damage on these guys that we tend to see on the Tranters. Looking a little bit closer, you'll see we don't have any sort of flat spring like we saw in the last episode. Nothing here, nothing here. That's because it's all down in that central arbor. So if we pull out our rod, again, and get it out of our way, we'll be able to pull out our central arbor. This is under no pressure except for just a little bit of, well, no, there's nothing. As a matter of fact, you should be a little bit careful not to lose it when you're unloading your pistol because there's just no resistance when we have this guy indexed over. So we'll go ahead and pull him out. It wants to fall free, there's no retention. And then, of course, with our gate open, we'd be able to pull out our cylinder. 6 shots this time. And then, if we flip this guy back over, we can actually take, you know what, let me zoom in on this. The central arbor has a channel cut inside of it, and inside the channel is a fairly long flat spring. I don't know if that shows, but let me put some flex on it. Oh, you know what, I don't think my pokey's quite, oh, there it goes. Yeah, so there's some flex. So what does that mean? Well, that means that when our ejector rod is inserted back down in here, it's being pressed out of the channel and into the wall, the inside wall of the cylinder. So there's an internal resistance that prevents counter rotation, like we saw with the spring in the Tranter in our last episode. So there's your friction to prevent the one-sided weighted cylinder from twisting whenever the gun is partially loaded. Having gotten it this far apart, we're pretty much done. There's no viewing window, no side plate, no nothing. You can pop the grip with 2 screws, but really you're only going to see the mainspring a bit. Everything is right in here, and there's no way to access it easily, not without fishing it all in and fishing it all back into place, like building a ship in a bottle. So, rugged, yes. Dependable, sure. Something you want to have to go in and out of? Never. Thankfully, you don't have to very often. These guns tend to be very good runners. Coming off of like the Tranter, I would say this feels like a more machined, consistent frame. It doesn't feel as handmade. This gun is certainly more rugged. However, it's not necessarily as thoughtful. And while I have you in this position, just one more thing, look at the size of this window for the cylinder and note the fact that there's some extra meat right here that we could be using to have a little bit bigger of a cylinder. Now, just to remind you, this is an RIC new model in 450 Adams. Other RIC labeled or RIC pattern revolvers may differ. Batch manufacturing. As a matter of fact, Webleys in smaller calibers from this same period tend to vary much more than the larger bore 44 or 45 caliber guns. That's because they were made in smaller batches. The mechanism, however, should be just about the same throughout. So let's get a look at what that might be with an animation from Bruno.
To load our revolver, we'll first manually rebound the hammer, open the spring-biased gate, and load up our rounds. Looking inside, we're going to see a very familiar system, assuming you saw a previous episode on the Tranter. The core difference is in the strut, which, like the Tranter, is derived from the old 1851 Adams. In single action, manually cocking the hammer back drags the strut along thanks to its 90-degree head tucked into a hollow in the hammer body. Pulling the trigger presses the strut out of the way just as the sear is tipped, releasing the hammer to fall. Just to show that again, focusing on the sear, as the hammer is drawn back, the sear catches in its second notch at full cock. Pulling the trigger tips the sear, releasing the hammer to fall. Returning to the strut, if we just pull the trigger, it tips the hammer back until it slips free. Like the Tranter, the strut is powered by the same spring that presses the hand forward. This time, however, it's a bit more direct, working on a shelf milled into the strut. The hand, also attached to the trigger, rotates the cylinder by acting on the ratchet teeth, driving it only clockwise. The trigger includes a projection at its top, serving as a cylinder stop, preventing over-rotation before the hammer falls. Before unloading the now empty revolver, we'll manually retract the hammer until the sear catches on its first notch. This is the rebounded position, keeping the firing pin clear of the cylinder. Now we can open our loading gate again, turn and pull out the ejector, rotate it over, and manually eject each spent case. Alright, let's see how she shoots.
If you should go to Ireland, the place you'll never know, the dear old land's completely changed from days of long ago. The fine old Irish families who made the country grand, they all have started across the sea to rule in Yankee land. In Ireland, yeah, the old place isn't like it was before. They cheered the king and then salute him, regular Irishmen would shoot him. Ireland isn't Ireland anymore. Guns and croakers too are men of Irish birth. Their fighting fathers tried to wipe old England off the earth. But now King Croker's pals in sick left Tammany, and soon the men will have the nerve to visit in Ireland. Yeah, the old place isn't like it was before. You see men like Richard Croker playing the King of England poker. Ireland isn't Ireland anymore. There's no more peace in Ireland from Dublin up to Cork. It's getting so that no one there will eat a piece of pork. And up around Killarney there's a man named Michaud. He's bottling up Killarney's lake to sell them for Cologne. In Ireland, yada, the old place isn't like it was before. They call the babies Hans and Herman, everyone there is talking German. Ireland isn't Ireland anymore.
That is delightful. Let's talk about production though. When 1,000 RIC revolvers were ordered in early 1868, Webley was what we'd consider a medium batch producer in Birmingham. The large orders allowed Webley and Son to use more permanent machinery and tooling when producing their next much larger batches of revolvers. An article from the November 1874 issue of Iron magazine espouses a series of modern conveniences found at Webley and Son. It lists things like planers, lathes, borers, jigs, and even hydraulic presses, all being used in factory manufacture. However, we also learned that Webley was still drilling their cylinders one chamber at a time, which means despite being a large batch, it was likely still just a batch. True serial manufacture would take some more years and further innovation, but I suspect Webley was only in place to make such a later deal thanks to the advancements brought on by the mass sales of the RIC. Unfortunately, Webley's inventive use of serial blocks with restarts and frankly puffery mean that I cannot estimate total production, nor have I been able to find a consistent way of dating these things. But we do know it was a popular little handgun not just in Toronto, who kept coming back for updated models, nor the Irish Constabulary. This guy became just about standard for Empire police around the world. The United Kingdom proper shows small orders by the army, likely for various guard and military duties, for a number of years. Ireland, of course, Canada, yes, but we also see purchases by several police forces in Australia and in South Africa. They were all buying the Webley, and Webley leveraged the sales for further advertising. And this proved to be a key component in Webley's rise. They stamped their name and logo clearly on the gun. They touted the adoptions in their ads. They spread the word and built up trust, all while quietly improving the product, as we can see. An example of this sort of aggressive marketing can be found in the creation of the RIC 1882 model, or at least a derivative thereof. These emerged as a slightly smaller framed and therefore lighter revolver, primarily chambered in .442 and .450 centerfire, popular police calibers. Considering they were released just as Webley started moving on to the new model for a longer cylinder for the .455 government cartridge, it's likely the 1882 would have been a nameless option if not for another prominent adoption. Webley actually sold their new revolver through W.J. Hill for a while, unmarked and rebranded by him. This, again, is likely where they managed to make a strong connection. In November of 1883, the London Metropolitan Police would adopt that slightly smaller RIC pattern as their own. Webley then branded any Model 82 in .450 centerfire as a Metropolitan Police model, including a logo with cuffed hands on the frames of the guns. The non-450s were just branded as RIC 82s. Over time, the MP model would also evolve, usually to share parts with the RIC, meaning an acorn-shaped ejector and fluted cylinders. While we're on the topic of other Webley models, let's do some quick confusion cleanup just for a second. This is our RIC number 1, and this is the regular number 1, which, as we said earlier, uses the pre-RIC Marriott style lockwork and hammer block. The large bore version of that gun is the number 1.5. Nothing confusing here, folks. Now, the plain number 1 action was shrunk to make the Webley Pug. The RIC number 1 action was shrunk to make the Webley Bulldog, a 5-shot, large-bore, pocket-friendly revolver, extremely famous in its own right. Lots of small British pattern revolvers get lumped into the Bulldog category, but this is the original. And let's focus on that gun for a moment longer, actually, because it wasn't just a spin-off of the RIC family. Over time, successful sales of the Bulldog would inspire yet another new model. You see, that little grip was apparently uncomfortable. So the otherwise tiny Bulldog, not that I have one here, got a bigger hunk of wood, which actually resulted in this, the RIC model of 1883. A light box. At 7.1 inches in length and weighing just 1.3 pounds, this is clearly a much more pocket-friendly version of our previous RIC. That savings comes at a cost though. We can now only fit 5 rounds in the cylinder. For this particular example, they are 4.55 Webley, more on that in a second. Yep, I snuck in another gun. It's very sneakably sized, and like our RIC, this is actually the most up-to-date version. The earliest RIC 83s were still only chambered for 450 Atoms, so the fatter grip was the defining feature from a standard Bulldog. Over time, however, unlike the Bulldog, the RIC 83 was updated to take the 4.55 government cartridge, bigger cylinder. Also, like so many other Webley models, the ejector was updated to an acorn shape. Must have been really easy to get those acorn shapes in the Birmingham market. Everybody went to them. All right, let's get a look at this thing. Once more, not quite the same as before, because coming from our original RIC, we have a couple features that we can talk about. Most obviously, the fact that this is much more compact, and it has this weird chubby grip that we're going to find out whether or not Mae's a fan of in a moment. Otherwise, mechanism's the same, barrel shorter, but same barrel, same ovate barrel. Hammers are both manual rebounders. In this case, this one's already rebounded. Single and double action with the same sear system, same ejector, although shortened, obviously. And you may notice, though, sort of backwards here, the larger gun has the smaller cylinder. That's because this one happens to be chambered for 450 Atoms, and this one happens to be chambered for 4.55, which means that we had to have that longer cylinder. You know what, let's go ahead and get this guy out of the way and just do a quick check to make sure that I'm an honest man. Single, double, very smooth. Flip this guy over, rotate, and pull. Don't forget to manually rebound. Open your gate, always manually rebound, folks. Don't tear up these old revolvers, even though the Webleys will let you clear. And we can eject and load. The central arbor is almost comically easy to remove at this point. And then our cylinder comes free, and check the math. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals on that flower. Excellent. And just like the other model, that's as far as you can really get. There is not a side plate or any other easy access on this gun. Now the internals of this pistol are just about the same as our RIC, so let's skip the animation and just go shoot the thing.
What he can do to defend our British Empire and see her through. For it's a dear old land, is the motherland, her sons are ever true, and their boys in the far off other lands will see her through and through. It's a dear old home, is the homeland. It's as good as the days of yore. We are steady, aye and ready, while the British Bulldog's watching at the door. British Bulldog's watching at the door.
That is a lot of oomph for a little gun. I can't wait to ask Mae about shooting this thing. When introduced, this little honey would set you back £1, 17 shillings and 6 pence. I'm not sure if the later 4.55 version cost any extra from that. Chambering options included 450 Adams, 455 British, 380, 320, rare cases of 44 Russian, and at least one known example in 45 ACP. I want to try that. Like the original RIC, the 83 found service both at home and abroad. Pieces have turned up marked by the Australian government and the Cape Colony. The Director General of India Stores was purchasing them as late as 1911. These are expected to have normal War Office inspection marks, by the way. Now, despite those impressive dates, it does appear sales would wind down starting in the 1890s, thanks to the introduction of newer revolvers, ones we've covered loosely before, and I'd like to cover in better detail again someday. Now, documentation does exist that seems to suggest that Webley stopped receiving their forged frames from their supplier in 1893. It also seems that production slowed way down after the merger with Scott, a topic for another time. However, sales of existing inventory are documented up to 1914, and it's definite that solid frames were abandoned during the Great War in favor of producing the standard top brakes for government service. Despite a halt in production, it does appear the RIC in both the new model and 1883 configuration saw some limited service during the war. Well, they or their various clones did, and believe me, there are a lot of copycats, as these were inexpensive to produce and could make for quick sellers to cash-strapped buyers. Following the war, production doesn't appear to have restarted. Solid frames were now solidly off the table. The Webley assembly line was going to break open only. But waste not, want not, onesie-twosie sales seem to have gone into the 1930s, with the solid frame still being listed in their 1939 catalog. That's amazing. Don't mean they were selling, but that's amazing. Now, I know some of you, more versed in gun lore, have been screaming at the screen for a while now. What about Custer's Webleys? There's a story out there that Major General George Armstrong Custer had been presented a pair of Webley's brand new RIC revolvers in the summer of 1869. These were supposedly presented by Lord Berkeley C.S. Paget. The problem is, there are a lot of stories here. Here's how it goes. His brother definitely received a gift from Paget, a single Galland Somerville revolver. From there, the stories sort of radiate outward, that Custer also received a Galland, or that he received a single Webley, or a pair of Webleys, or that they were sent later. The trouble is, I haven't managed to track down what I would call hard evidence of the story. The more I dig in, the weirder it gets, up to the Battle of Little Bighorn years after the fact. Lieutenant Edward Godfrey of K Company 7th Cavalry would write a letter containing the following claim as to what Custer was carrying. 2 Bulldog self-cocking English white-handled pistols with a ring in the butt for a lanyard. Seems straightforward enough, but memories can be hazy. And it gets a bit doubtful when you find out that Custer actually did own a set of shiny, white-gripped Smith & Wesson single actions that could easily have been confused for an extant Webley, and most of the stories claim it was one Webley, so I guess it's a mystery for someone else to solve someday. Returning to what we do know, the RIC wasn't much of a frontline military revolver. Most of its utility would have been police or constabulary use, even in wartime. But it had a tremendous service life in those roles, and it displaced other guns for frontline service. It was affordable, and for a time practically ubiquitous. And as we'll see later, it established Webley as a government arms supplier, a name above others in the crowded Birmingham trades. But we'll tear into all that more some other day. For now, let's just go ahead and go ask Mae what it's like to shoot these pocket-sized big bore wheel guns. All right, once more, we've made room for Mae.
Hello.
And, Webley Royal Irish Constabulary #1, new model.
So brand new.
In 450 Adams. You could have had 455, but we don't have that one.
Dang it.
I'm sorry.
Could have been a little bit better.
I'm sorry.
It does smell new, though.
What does it smell like?
It's kind of a little bit like pennies, but not like a dirty penny.
Like a dirty pen?
Yeah, it's specifically...
Is that what new things smell like?
I guess. I mean, you're the one that's saying it's new.
You said it smelled new. Okay.
You said new.
All right. We are coming fresh off of an episode on the 1868 Tranter.
Yes.
The Webley is clearly related to this gun. It uses the same lockwork.
Okay.
It uses the same chamberings. It is roughly the same size. I know the short barrel, don't let it confuse you. The frames are roughly the same size.
Okay.
The grips are going to be close to the same size. Our 68 was a 5-shot, but there's also available in 6-shot. This is a 6-shot Webley. The short answer is it is perfectly apt to compare this to that.
Okay.
Go ahead, compare this to that.
So, well, I've already got a longer barrel.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty rad. So that's an improvement, I would say, because that's what I was wanting on that guy for the longer barrel version.
Mm-hmm.
The grip, like you said, no, that's not the same. That doesn't feel the same. I mean, the angle is the same, but what is this bell out at the base? And I've lost my knuckle.
This has a little bit of bell out.
No, but like it feels like it's fatter.
Yeah, that one gets fatter on the sides. It also has a very distinct palm swell right about mid position.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but that centers kind of poorly in my hand.
I found that I have a very hard time keeping my webbing with the knuckle.
Same.
And yet having my palm in that swell.
Yeah.
And so I believe it's in the shooting footage. Like you tend to get chased up and down the grip.
A little bit more so, yes.
Because of that swell.
I feel like if they made the knuckle bigger, like if they'd kept the large knuckle, I wouldn't have had as bad of a time, but that swelling definitely did not help.
Yes.
It made it worse.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I figured. It's all right.
What else is more differenter?
It looks more differenter. Like it looks more polished. Look at all the lines on this guy. It looks cleaner.
They are guns you should be able to confuse for each other in terms of how similar they are, and yet when you get your hands on them, they're distinctly different.
Yeah, no, this doesn't look anything like that. Just in terms of just the difference in the lines.
It's hard to put a finger on, but I'm going to tell you, holding the two of them, that one was made predominantly with machine work.
Yeah.
And this one was made predominantly with handwork.
Like you can just tell by looking at it.
It's just a feel. The contours are not machine contours on this gun. They're very forgiving contours for hand filing so that it's very hard to tell that something's not necessarily perfectly symmetrical. There's all these extra little changes that are easy enough to do by hand, right? Because you're going to be doing it anyway.
Right. Meanwhile, this one's got simpler lines.
Right. Cut, turn, cut.
Yeah,
Even just in the back here, where we've got a swoop, another opposite swoop, a swoop, and then back across. What's that one? One radius.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Broop, and you're out.
And I've lost my pretty engravings.
Yeah, no engravings.
No
That is a
pans on this
police
one.
gun for policemen.
Oh,
for
okay.
policing.
For the policemen. For
Yes,
policemen.
for constable. They constablize.
They constablize.
Yes, that's the term.
Yeah, pretty good. Oh, at least I've got a lanyard ring.
Well, for
That's more
constabling,
military, yeah.
You don't want to get taken away.
Oh, that's fair. And then I obviously have a different ejector rod here. It's an acorn?
It's tucked away the same way.
Well, no, I don't have the lever that I would use to...
But I mean, it's inside the arbor.
Yeah, it is inside the arbor and it is tucked away. I have lost that little lever release on the side that I did like, which, obviously. But for this one, you just rotate it in order to then pop it out.
No, just pop it out.
It's very stiff.
pop it out.
It's very stiff.
Just pop it out. There you go.
I don't know why it is that stiff. Is it
Maybe
to do with the polish?
Well, first of all, that
or-
one probably got bent somewhere along the way.
Probably.
But also, the arbor spring is pressing up against it. Remember, this particular gun has a friction spring here, right?
Yeah.
Which means there's no spring tension on the ejector, so the ejector is nice and loose. It just zips in and out.
Why is there a channel down the rod too?
That's for the little pass-through locky nubbin to be able to get through the whole length. So you have the sharp channel on it that then wants to cut your
It
finger.
is very sharp. Yeah, I'm noticing that. I guess I didn't notice it on range for some reason.
Well, because
but
you're
now
using the
here,
acorn.
yeah.
You're not supposed to touch it down there.
I touched it. I just keep touching it now. I'm just like, it's so sharp. Let me keep touching it.
All right, so that's your ejector.
Yep, it feels just as flimsy as the Tranter's does.
Yeah, you haven't even opened the gate or rebounded the hammer or nothing.
Well, I'm going on looks, okay?
Oh, okay,
I'm just going on looks, and I had it on this side. Oh man, this side's totally different. All right, no, but Othais isn't wrong. The gate is obviously different. It is definitely more secure feeling. It's not, flopping a little bit here on the side. But then when I open it, I'm like, oh, that feels very flimsy.
It works the same as ours, by the way. It has a two-position gate with a flat spring, and you go over center, and then it clicks down to their position. Unlike our Tranter, they set it to be very soft. So when it rolls over center, it's a very soft feeling. It doesn't feel as positive. And yet, it stays sealed up nice and tight because they're not bending the crap out of their flat spring when they go over center.
At least there's that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, definitely an improvement, but it just feels like it could easily snap off.
Now roll that cylinder for your microphone. Lovely
I love the
guinea
squeaking.
pig noises.
Yeah, pretty much. Why are there no clicks?
Why are there no clicks?
Yeah, you normally hear like clicks with rotating a revolver cylinder, like you go, and there's like no click.
Because
click
you're
with
not really, I mean, you're slipping off the hand, but it's just so delicate of a connection right now because you don't have it cocked back and it's not being shoved forward.
Okay.
It's in there. It's just not very pronounced.
No, now it's just squeak instead of click, and it's kind of weird and sad sounding as a result. You're like, that's not very positive feeling at all.
You know that part of the movie when they're doing Russian roulette and they like load one in and they close it up and then they go squeak.
Like a mouse.
Squeak.
That's
just
so
rolls over
dangerous
once.
sounding.
Yeah. Well, it's got that friction spring set down inside there.
Mine sounds like a gerbil.
And again, that's not a free spinning cylinder. That is under friction. So, by the way, you will feel that friction, both of these guns. That friction is part of your experience when pulling the trigger because you must overcome it.
Yeah.
Webley would go completely the opposite direction in one of their later guns where they just had to get rid of all friction, and it came up with a very interesting system.
And we've obviously got a different hammer shape here, and the hammer's lower set, so now double or single action, no matter what state this gun is in, I can finally look down the sights at all times.
Yeah, not only that, but they got the spur further back and down.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. Yeah. It's less travel.
I have to reach up over the top of the gun in order to cock this guy.
Yeah, in order to get past the knuckle. For this one, it's just a quick reach up and pull back. That's such a short travel by comparison. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, very comfortable.
Feels pretty good.
What else we got going on different? 6-shot, I think we covered that.
Yep.
The strange oval barrel kind of puts some extra mass out front.
It looks massive by comparison. Like that barrel looks unusually large for what is supposed to be.
Yeah, but that's a trick of the eye. If you look at it vertically, it doesn't look that wide at all.
No, yeah, okay.
It's just because it's an oval.
Yeah, literally the oval's throwing me off. And then very nice brass front sight. Yeah. We've gone to a half moon shape.
I don't know if it is brass because that'd be awful soft. That doesn't look chipped up, but it is a golden colored.
It's very pretty.
Yeah, I'm unsure of the actual metal.
Okay.
So,
and then it looks like our sear is no longer recessed. Is it sticking out right there?
Yes.
Is that the sear?
Yes, you're very clearly seeing the sear that was recessed in this other system.
All right.
It works exactly the same though. It is literally this. I mean, little tiny changes in shape and whatever, but it is the same mechanism. It is the Tranter lock work that is in there. So, and that, by the way, doesn't just. I mean, that's a patent of Tranter's. Yes, that went back to I believe 56, but it was used even before that to a degree. Like parts of that lock work were available on Tranter's for many, many years back in the percussion era. So. Okay.
Well, honestly, aside from that, looks wise, I mean. Obviously, the cylinder's a little bit shorter, change of the round, everything else.
No, it's 450. It's just that is a probably steel cylinder of good quality. And they made it nice and small and fluted it. And to be fair, we kind of covered it on these, but we don't have an example to show. These ended up with fluted cylinders at the end of their production too, because probably, again, steel quality coming in.
Yeah, okay.
So you could make it lighter and it was still just as strong.
So this one's got a few steps forward into the future. Just a few.
Well, being a new model, that one was probably made in the early 1880s, maybe mid 1880s.
Sure.
Whereas this one...
So just a few years difference.
No, this one was made... Well, so this one was designed 68, right? Released, this one physically produced probably about 78.
Sure.
That one was probably physically produced 7 years later.
Okay.
But design-wise, 67. So same, they're right on top of each other. Because this is technically the 68, but its parentage is like a nearly identical revolver from 63. In between those two is this in 67, which uses, oh, surprise, surprise, the same lockwork and other things. Because again, like we covered, Birmingham manufacturers tended to license from each other and even use the same forgings and same parts suppliers.
Okay.
So it's perfectly normal to have nearly identical guns from different manufacturers where they put their own little twist on the combination of features.
And then aside from that, it just doesn't feel as dense. Even though it's bigger, it just doesn't feel as heavy as the Tranter is.
No, there's a clear, just holding them.
Change in metal.
Yes. I really don't know how to express the combination of density and hardness and just, I guess, even smell. Like you were smelling it, you joke, but there is sort of a smell to like a harder steel versus an old iron.
I'm going to wash my hands after this.
Thank you. So that one feels like steel all the way through. Now, whether it is an iron frame or not, I'm not sure. But the point being is the metal quality is much higher. You're getting more hardness for less weight on that gun. And you're also getting it cut by machinery. So the gun itself feels, to me, I don't know about
refined.
You. Yeah, it does. It feels much more positive. It feels much more robust.
I think polished is the word I used earlier,
Yeah, this feels like bubble gum compared to that. And I don't know how to explain it, really.
Oh, then there's the look and then there's the feel. It's two different things.
Right. So you go to shoot it.
Yeah.
How's that going for you?
Well, like I said, at least I've gained my sights back, so I have them both single and double. That's pretty rad. The hammer, like we mentioned, it probably isn't any difference in the weight, but just that change up in the shape of the hammer, it's giving me less travel. It's easier to get around, especially with the loss of the knuckle back here, which, pros and cons with that.
Right.
I'm going to expect it. The the trigger feels about the same.
In terms of weight?
In terms of weight, travel-wise, doesn't feel like I'm traveling as far.
Yeah, I don't feel like I had to tuck up under myself as much with the Webley.
No, yeah, definitely. But I did not. With the recoil on this one, I would say it's moderate, but I don't feel like it was enough for it to be shifting as much in the grip as I don't feel like it should have been shifting in my hand as much as it was, but I definitely had to re-grip the gun a few times.
So what I'm hearing is medium recoil with an incredibly unoptimized grip.
It just, I want to say that puff out here at the base, like that was supposed to go into that palm swelling. I want to say that really didn't help. That actually made things worse because I obviously felt like that a taper, you just easily naturally want to slide to the thinner end, which is at the top.
Yeah.
Of course that's going to happen.
Yeah, the first round it really juked you and you had to slide way back down and you gripped firmer. And then I noticed you got I think 2 more off.
Yeah.
And then you ended up having to readjust again because it's just pushing you up the grip.
I basically was like, maybe if I wrap my pinky around the base a little bit.
Once
And
you
I was
hook
just
your
like,
pinky.
Nope. And that still didn't help because once I got to the very end of the trigger pull, I was just like, dang it, I still ended up shifting a little bit.
Hooking your pinky was such a tell, though, that it's like the gun is trying to crawl down your hand.
Right.
And you're just like, stay up.
Yeah, it's just like I desperately was trying to stay up and I still managed to creep on
That's exactly why the knuckle's supposed to be there.
Right, to help prevent that.
But then you're not making contact with the knuckle while lining up with that trigger.
Yeah.
If you actually try to hold the knuckle, so you're way up here, your level point is way high, and then your trigger means that you have to tuck your finger kind of awkwardly. So you end up adjusting.
Slightly worse than the Tranter.
You end up adjusting a little bit lower so that you can pull along a better axis, but then of course you don't have a good grip and you slip.
Right.
So
I had to make the call that I made, but unfortunately it's just not very comfortable for shooting a few rounds off.
You wouldn't tell just by looking at them, but in the feel, Tranter grip way better.
Yeah, it just feels naturally easier to hold and like it's not going to slip as bad, which it didn't.
I think it chased around on the Tranter nearly as badly when I shot him. So, between the two.
Yeah. When I had to pick.
Well, we're talking about the same sort of arrow, right?
So let's say even if I had the 6-shot and longer barrel version of that guy, okay, I'd still probably pick this guy.
Yeah, just because there's more trust.
Yeah, there's more trust, and in general, it just felt better. It didn't feel as bad, and honestly, it still performed better technically because I don't remember you replacing a bunch of parts in this guy.
No, I think there's more trust in the operation of that gun, and there's slight changes to the ergonomics that make that way more comfortable.
And I had my sights at all times.
I will say, I would get it, and I would immediately carve. I would take if I was having to use it to protect my life, I would sit there and sand the back of this sucker so fast.
Yep.
I mean, I'd be all over trying to get that tucked in more.
I can make the adjustments on the fly.
Yeah, that would be me. I'd be like, buy it and just grind that down.
Yeah, just like nice sand, put a little finish on it, do a little doodle.
Does that pistol, so now we're talking about sort of a medium-sized pistol shooting upwards of 4.55.
Yeah.
4.76, right?
Sure,
Those are military cartridges that you've shot in military revolvers that you liked. Mm-hmm. So being able to shoot 4.55, we're shot 4.50 in this one, but let's say you shot 4.55.
Sure.
6 shots, 4.55, gate loader, no frills, but reliable.
Okay.
How's this feeling for the 1878 to 1900 range?
I'd probably put it somewhere in the middle of the road, which it's still pretty good, but the problem is that without any of the frills or anything like that, I don't really have any rapid loading or unloading of this guy. So it's a weird era because if we're talking about 78 to 1900, we spoke about this last time. Yeah.
But for most of that, the U.S. would have the Colt 1873 single action.
Oh, God, yeah, they would. That's really weird to think about.
I take that. I already said I like the Tranter almost more than a 73. There's some trust issues there.
Uh-huh.
I do take the Webley over the 73.
Oh, yeah.
Because boom, 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 boom.
Hands down, all set.
Double action is good.
It's faster.
It's weird because a lot of people argue with this on this one, but then they'll turn around and say that, no bolt action could ever beat a semi-automatic. And you're like, but those are rifles. There's at least an argument for accuracy's sake over 200 meters. Mm-hmm. But when you're talking about handguns, you're talking about defensive ranges of 40 feet max, right?
Usually, yes.
Yeah. So even more so than the gun, guys. Mm-hmm. Double action is clearly going to be better.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah. So
Hands down.
it's only specific little areas where a single action revolver could beat a double action if it was a bad enough designed double action.
Right.
So, yeah.
I don't know.
But then the U.S. jumps to the new Army, new Navy, where it's like swing out cylinder, rapid eject, rapid load.
That's some fanciness right there.
So, and then Britain, they went with brake
Top
weapons.
brake, yep. That worked out pretty good.
But at the same time, though, same period, most armies are sticking with gate loaders. Like
Yeah,
the broad
that's true.
majority are still using gate loaders.
But some of them end up having Abity systems later on, which help with the rapid loading and unloading.
Quite a bit. And this does none of that for you.
No, unfortunately. I've got a little tiny acorn. Maybe make the acorn bigger.
You know, I can't wait. We actually, we keep saying like designed in 68, but fielded around 78 for the Tranter. This one was fielded right away. So it had police use in 68, 69. And for a police weapon at the time, I imagine it was very good. Because if they're not even getting like the Army quality stuff, and yet we're saying that this could be, Army usable, that means this is going to be a great revolver for that sort of police use role. Especially in 450 Adams when you have like a, fairly fat, heavy hitting cartridge to a degree. Like the bullet's heavy enough, right? But it's low power. So that means penetration through the outside of buildings is probably very unlikely. You know what I mean? So you're not running the penetration risk. I really think that like the Webley and the Tranter would make really good police weapons in that period.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I'm trying to think, something you said about earlier. When did the Galland come out?
The 1868 Galland?
Yeah. 1868. Duh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good rapid unloading.
Load.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see something similar to the Galland system adopted in 1880 by Britain, but that's another episode.
Ooh.
And it has its problems, as we are going to see.
Okay.
But before we get into that, we have to talk about another gun.
Yay! I shot 2 for this episode. Although this one was different.
This is the RSC 83. Same frame, except for the longer cylinder and 4.55.
You mean shorter cylinder?
No, it's longer cylinder. That's a
Oh,
barrel.
I'm sorry, barrel. I'm stupid.
Yeah. I'm glad you're
Ignore
here.
me. Yeah.
Longer cylinder for
Yep.
the 4.55. Same frame. However, everything's been sort of shrunk.
Yeah.
What you got there? What's been shrunk on that gun?
A lot of things have been shrunk. The barrel, for one, I think that is literally the shortest barrel we have shot for this series for a revolver.
We did shoot the Bayard pocket pistol. I don't know how short that
For
barrel
a
is.
revolver.
Oh, for a revolver, yes.
Yes.
That's
like 2 inches.
That is the smallest revolver we have shot.
Period.
And yet, out of the 3, it's the one that's in 4.55. Like, I love that. The other 2 big ones, 450 Adams. The littlest one, 4.55.
So we got a shorter barrel. We got a shorter little acorn ejector rod set up here. We have a shorter hammer and a shorter grip. Wow,
And a
they're just
fat
trying to
grip.
shorter and fat grip. It's fatter. What is happening here? It's getting worse. The knuckle is not any bigger, and now it's just fatter. Oh, that feels horrible.
Yeah, I don't even know why they have the knuckle.
I don't, there's no point to it anymore. It doesn't do anything. Like, God, this just feels awful.
Okay, so visually, I guess we're caught up. How about actually shooting it?
Well, okay, so yeah, the sights are still the same. So I don't know if I mentioned it on the Webley, the other one. So I don't know if I mentioned that the V-notch is not quite as deep and strong as the Tranter's was, unfortunately.
So you prefer the Tranter sight?
Yeah, the Tranter one is definitely better, but this one's just okay. At least now, it's better when I can see it, but this is inherently better because it's higher than the hammer.
That.
Right, yeah, all the time. But actually shooting it, God, that hammer pullback is not it's worse because one, obviously I've got a longer pull now because they've made the hammer shorter, and then 2, something about right here, this feels tighter.
Just the shape of the grip?
Yeah, and my knuckle is just even resting in there. It feels uncomfortable.
Yeah, so you have less leverage because you have a shorter hammer spur.
Right.
And then it pinches you to death when you try to do it.
That's fantastic.
To be fair, how often are you going to use this, single action?
I don't even know.
It's a 5-shot pocket revolver. This is a double action revolver if I've ever seen one.
Right, that's true.
So how is the double action?
Horrible.
What do you mean horrible?
Horrible. Unfortunately, that little grip really isn't helping, and it just is so crowded feeling on this gun that I am just pulling my hand essentially into a fist.
Right.
That is uncomfortable as heck to have to do.
I'm trying to think. Okay, fingertip, double action all the way in. I like the hammer line. I get my natural grip. I don't find it that horrible. I think the Tranter was almost more uncomfortable because you had to pull it further to the rear. But the problem you're going to have is now you have to experience the recoil.
Right. On top of that.
And when you're positioned correctly on this gun and the recoil hits, you're fighting the bell.
You're fighting the bell. You don't have any knuckle to help prevent this from sliding and impacting you worse. And on top of that, I'm not kidding. For me, I'm tucked up real hard up against that trigger guard, and that really banged the heck out of my middle finger on the range that day.
So you love this gun, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
That was Mae's immediate commentary after firing it. It was like, wow, this is the best gun.
Yeah.
And I love it.
It was not immediately saying how much I hate this gun. It was literally not that at all.
So you're saying the recoil was mild?
It was that. Sorry, making sure you don't step on the audio equipment down there.
Mae's trying to keep me from stepping on our mic.
Yeah, I know, right? He wants to do it. But no, recoil was pretty significant on this guy, unfortunately. And the whole thing about its size, the bell grip banging into the center of my hand. No meat, by the way. It's not sitting on the nice cushion of the palm of my thumb or even down here into the pinky where there's a little extra meat right. No, it's going to hit right here, dead center in my hand. Horrible. Hated it.
At least there was only 5 shots.
Yeah, there is that. At least I only had 5 shots.
So would you want to use something like this in a battlefield?
I mean, no. Also, the hammer down. I shouldn't be able to rotate the cylinder. How am I able to get past that? Is it just wear?
That seems to be a thing with the Webleys, is that there's just enough of a gap for the rim and for the strike down of the hammer.
Okay.
That you can twist it without damaging anything with the hammer down. It's not ideal, and you can feel a little bit of a lope to it as the hammer escapes each chamber, but you can do it. It's not going to tear it up.
Well, good. So at any point, I could possibly accidentally rotate it.
Well, it is one of those things that's interesting that, yes, it will keep you from damaging the gun directly, but I do wonder if it doesn't encourage poor behavior that will wear it out, because, again, you're just barely rounding the tip.
Right.
Yeah, you should have to rebound, and it's almost like it's teaching you to do the wrong thing. But that being said, that Tranter was really messed up by somebody slamming on it, not understanding what to do. So I'll take it. You know, in an emergency, if I forget to rebound the hammer, at least I can still move the cylinder around. I'll take it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you said you're going to take that into battle?
No. I'm really not a fan of this option. If I have to pick between the two, I'm going to go with that guy.
This one feels okay.
Yeah.
I'm not, there's nothing to write home about, but it feels okay. I trust it to defend, I trust it to go bang every time.
Very reliable. Considering the age and it's not that far away from the Tranter, no, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, out of all 3, this one had no problem shooting.
No, that was nice. I love it whenever we take a gun to the range and it actually runs.
Okay, well, I guess that's our review for not only the Webleys, but I guess we talked about the Tranter a good bit too.
Yeah.
That is probably the 2 big names of the Birmingham gun trade that we would encounter. There's others that we could see maybe if we go further back in time. But at the same time, by going back, that becomes a little bit more obscure because it's more about regional experiences, whereas these are sort of world renowned. People tend to know the name Webley.
That's true.
And then the minute you touch into the old world, you understand the name Tranter in British history. But not necessarily modern. I think for a lot of people, this is the first they probably heard of Tranter.
I hadn't heard of Tranter until you started actually researching the guns.
Yeah. And then for those of you who want to go further back, we'll actually end up talking about Adams at some point.
Fantastic.
And that should really help a lot of things become clear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Going to open some doors.
Well, we're very used to the modernized Britain, right?
Okay.
And we're used to seeing Britain's gun manufacturing as being on par with Germany or the US or whatever else.
So we're effectively going to get a peek into the past before it was.
Yeah, it's interesting how not long ago Britain was a guild system for firearms. And then it's sort of America that leads the way on machine tool and Britain that goes, I guess we better follow along with that. But it really comes much later because they had so many skilled men from doing stuff like this that it took longer than you'd think to get around to. And this is still a lot of handcrafted work that's put into this more so than guns we're going to see later.
Right.
But it takes Britain a while to come around just because they have such a buildup of people that are experienced on this. Whereas America, it's like, it's frontier. You don't necessarily have those guys. So you have to find a machine to do it. And so you'll see a totally different direction from, America in, say, 1873.
Because of the resources they had available. They had the machines, Britain had the people.
Yeah, it became an obsession in the U.S.
Okay.
And to the point that it wasn't necessarily financially feasible for a lot of people. Like we saw the closing of the Colts London factory today that we talked about.
Yeah.
But those are macro concepts that will be revealed as we talk about other firearms. I think, is there any final word for the Webleys, the early RICs?
Good to have the perspective. I think it'll give us some
it'll be a good start and leeway into further British development.
Yeah, it'll also be kind of a clear jump where you go, oh wow, they went from this to the top rate system.
I think that'll be huge to just be like, oh my goodness, yeah, that's a drastic change.
And it's not going to be anytime soon, but I would like to redo that episode.
Nice.
We have a lot better access to information and examples, and I think I can do a better workup as to how you end up with the Webley that we think of when we hear Webley.
So are you going to go from the all 32 guy to the Webley guy then?
No, it's going to be spread out.
Okay.
But until then, you guys can check after the credits. Thank you for updates. I almost said updates for credits.
I know. I'm proud.
All right, have a good one.
Bye.
Thank you, patrons. This episode, like so many others, would not have been possible without the continued support of our donors. So seriously, thank you. If you haven't joined up, please consider supporting us on Patreon, Subscribestar, or Utreon. Gain access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, bonus videos, or high-res scans, and help us document these pieces of history.